Tonight's video is not for casual viewers. These are 15 real horror experiences sent in by ordinary people, and some of them are deeply disturbing. A 2-year-old girl calmly explains that an old woman visits her at night to tell her she's going to die soon. A group of friends drive to a haunted country road as a joke and come back with their truck covered in hundreds of tiny handprints. A guy home alone hears his mom walking around the house, even answers her when she talks back, only to discover she was at work the entire time. A woman living in the middle of the woods watches her bedroom doorknob turn slowly by itself, and hours later almost walks straight into a silent stranger standing in front of her car. And somewhere in Vermont, in the middle of an empty forest, a massive red dome of light appears in the sky, or collapses into itself, explodes into blinding white, and sends a wall of wind rushing toward a group of stunned witnesses. These are not creepypasta stories. These are detailed, first-hand accounts that the people who lived them still cannot explain. As you listen, ask yourself one thing. Are these people all imagining the same kinds of things? Or is there something else out there watching us from just beyond what we can see? Before we begin, do me a favor. Turn off the lights. Put on your headphones. And if you enjoy long, slow-burn horror and real-life supernatural stories, hit the subscribe button now so you don't miss the next upload. If you're brave enough to make it all the way to the end, I'll ask you to choose the one story that stayed with you the most. Ready? Let's start with Story 1. I grew up in a small town in the middle of the country, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and not much ever really happens. Cornfields stretched for miles in every direction, and at night the sky would open up wide and dark with barely any street lights to compete with the stars. It was quiet there, sometimes too quiet. When you're 17 and restless, that kind of quiet makes you look for something, anything, to break the boredom. I was one of the few people in my friend group who had a car. It wasn't anything special, just an old pickup truck that had seen better days, but it ran well enough, and it meant freedom. On the eve of Halloween that year, a group of us, some of my closest buddies and a few girls we'd been hanging out with, were driving around town trying to find something fun, or at least something spooky to do. We'd already done the usual small-town stuff. We'd driven past the cemetery. We'd cruised through the neighborhoods that went all out with decorations. We were still wound up and not ready to call it a night. I've always been a skeptic. Even back then, I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or any of that. I was the guy who would roll his eyes when someone told a scary story and then try to come up with a logical explanation for it. So, when one of the girls in the car started telling us about a haunted road about 30 miles out of town, I didn't take it seriously at all. I thought it was just another local legend, something teenagers passed around every October to scare each other. She said the road was called Country Road S. According to her, way back in the late 1800s, there had been a brutal murder there. She told it slowly, almost like she had practiced it before. There was a farm family living out there in the middle of nowhere. A husband and wife with 8 kids and a dog. The husband, she said, was a raging alcoholic who beat his wife regularly. One night, he came home drunk, more drunk than usual, and things got out of control. He shot his wife in a fit of rage. When he realized what he had done, something in him snapped. Instead of facing what he had done, he decided to end it all. But before turning the gun on himself, he killed all 8 of his children. After that, he shot himself, leaving the farm silent. According to the legend, the 8 children still played on the road in front of the house. People claimed they could hear laughter late at night. Some said they had seen a dog roaming near the farmhouse. Even though no one had lived there in decades, the way she told it, her voice low and serious, made it sound real enough to send a chill down your spine. But I still wasn't buying it. She said that if you drove out there at night and parked on the side of the road near the house, turned off your engine and shut off all electronics, phones, music, everything, you would hear the children laughing. And sometimes, if you were unlucky, you'd see the dog. We all kind of laughed, but at the same time no one said no. It was Halloween weekend. We were bored, and 30 miles didn't seem that far when you were 17 and looking for something to remember. So we went. The drive out there took us about half an hour. The farther we got from town, the darker it became. Street lights disappeared. The houses became scattered and then vanished altogether. The road narrowed and the trees leaned in closer. The conversation in the truck, which had been loud and joking at first, slowly died down. Even I felt a small knot in my stomach, but I told myself it was just the atmosphere. We finally turned onto Country Road S. It was just a long stretch of pavement cutting through open fields. No traffic, no lights, just us and the hum of my engine. We drove slowly, scanning both sides of the road. After a few minutes, we saw it. Off to the right, set back from the road, was an old farmhouse. Even in the dark, you could tell it had been abandoned for years. The paint was peeling. The porch sagged slightly in the middle. One of the windows looked broken. Behind it stood a large barn, just as weathered and tired. The place looked frozen in time. I pulled the truck over to the side of the road, directly across from the house. My heart was beating a little faster now, but I still told myself it was just excitement. We went through the little ritual she had described. Everyone powered off their phones completely. No screens glowing, no music. I turned off the engine. After a few seconds, I switched off the headlights. The sudden darkness felt thick and heavy, like a blanket dropped over us. At first, there was nothing, just silence. The kind of silence you only get in the middle of nowhere. You could hear your own breathing. One of the girls nervously laughed and then quickly stopped. We waited. About 10 minutes passed, long enough that people started whispering that it was all fake. I was about to turn the truck back on and call it a night when I heard it. Tap. It was faint, but clear. Something had tapped on the side of my truck. I froze. I told myself it was probably a branch or maybe the metal cooling down. Trucks make noises all the time. I didn't say anything at first. Then it happened again. Tap, tap. This time it was unmistakable. It sounded like something small hitting the driver's side door. A couple of people in the back seat asked if I heard that. I nodded, trying to stay calm. The tapping continued randomly for about 2 minutes. It wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, like someone was lightly knocking. Before I could fully process that, the sound changed. It turned into something like brushing or dragging. It started near the front of the truck and slowly moved along the entire length, all the way to the back. It was as if someone was running their hands or something along the side of the truck. At that point, I wasn't feeling so skeptical anymore. No one was laughing now. You could feel the fear in the cab. It was heavy and real. I kept staring straight ahead into the darkness, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation, maybe an animal, maybe tall grass. But there wasn't any tall grass near the road, and whatever it was, it felt intentional. Then we heard it. It started faintly, almost like the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was laughter, high-pitched, childlike, not just one voice but several. It sounded like kids playing, like they were running around somewhere in the dark, just out of sight. The laughter rose and fell, overlapping, echoing in a way that didn't make sense in an open field. That was the moment I lost it, or all the skepticism drained out of me. My hands were shaking as I reached for the keys. I turned the engine over and flipped the headlights back on. And that's when I saw it. About 10 yards in front of my truck, standing in the middle of the road, was a black dog. It looked old and rough, like a beat-up black lab. Its fur looked patchy. It just stood there staring at us, completely still. For a split second, no one moved. Then I slammed my foot on the gas. The truck roared forward, tires screeching as I swerved around the dog. I didn't look back. I just drove. No one told me to slow down. No one said anything for the first few minutes. We were all trying to process what had just happened. The drive back to town felt longer than the drive out. Every shadow on the side of the road made my heart jump. Eventually, we started talking, all at once trying to explain it. Maybe it was just coyotes. Maybe someone was messing with us. Maybe the dog belonged to a nearby farm. We tried to laugh it off, but the laughter sounded forced. When we finally got back to my house, I pulled into the garage and shut the truck off. The familiar light of home felt like a relief. We all stepped out, still buzzing with adrenaline. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was dirt, but as I got closer, my stomach dropped. My entire truck, both sides, the hood, even parts of the tailgate, was covered in tiny handprints. Not smudges, not random marks. Clear, small handprints, like children had pressed their hands all over it. They were layered over each other in some places, overlapping. Some were streaked slightly, as if dragged. Everyone went silent again, and no one had leaned against the truck. No kids had been near it before we left. I had washed it earlier that week, and it had been clean. And even if somehow kids had touched it earlier in the day, why would the prints suddenly be that visible now? I just stood there staring at it, feeling the fear creep back in stronger than before. That night has stayed with me for years. I've gone over it again and again in my head, trying to break it down logically. Maybe there was moisture in the air that revealed old prints. Maybe someone had played a prank. Maybe our minds filled in the gaps because we were already primed by the story. But I've never been able to fully explain the laughter, or the brushing along the truck, or the timing of it all. I'm still a pretty rational person. I don't jump to supernatural conclusions easily. But that night on Country Road S is something I've never been able to file away neatly in my mind. Whatever happened out there, it was real to us. And even now, years later, when I drive down dark country roads and hear something tap against my car, I remember the sound of children laughing in the middle of nowhere, and I grip the steering wheel just a little tighter. I used to sleep in the main room of a large basement when I was younger. It wasn't really meant to be a bedroom, just a wide, open space with cold, tiled floors and bare walls that made every sound echo more than it should. Right next to it was a smaller room where my brother slept. The two spaces were connected by a short hallway, and at night, when everything was quiet, even the smallest movement seemed louder than normal. The basement always had a strange feeling to it, especially after dark. During the day it was just another part of the house, a little colder than the rest, a little dimmer, but nothing too unusual. But at night, it felt different. The air seemed heavier, like it was pressing down on you, and the silence wasn't peaceful. It felt like the kind of silence where something could break it at any second. One night, I woke up suddenly without knowing why. It wasn't because of a noise or a dream, at least not that I could remember. It was just that feeling, that deep, uncomfortable sense that something wasn't right. My eyes opened, and I stared into the darkness, trying to figure out what had pulled me out of sleep. That's when I felt it, the unmistakable sensation that I wasn't alone. I stayed completely still, lying on my back, listening. My heart started beating faster, but I didn't want to move. It felt like if I moved, whatever was there would notice me. The room was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. It felt watched. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination. Kids think like that sometimes, especially in places like basements. So I forced myself to relax and close my eyes again, hoping sleep would come back quickly. It didn't. After a few minutes of lying there, I must have drifted off a little because the next thing I knew, I woke up again. Same feeling, even stronger this time. Something is watching you. That thought hit me so clearly it almost didn't feel like my own. My eyes snapped open, and I stared straight ahead into the dark room. I could feel my chest rising and falling faster now, my breathing shallow, my ears straining to catch any sound. Still nothing. At that point, I tried to convince myself it was my brother. He had his own room just a few steps away, and it wouldn't be the first time he tried to mess with me. That explanation made sense, and I held on to it because the alternative felt too real, too close. So I slowly pushed myself up into a sitting position on the mattress. And the moment I did, everything changed. The mattress beneath me suddenly lifted, like something had just jumped up onto it right next to me. It wasn't a small movement. It was strong enough that I felt my body shift with it. At the same time, I heard it, the sound of bare feet hitting the cold tile floor. Right beside me, it was fast, light, and unmistakably close. Before I could even process that, another sound followed. A child's laughter, a girl's laughter. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, high-pitched, playful. But in that moment, it felt completely wrong. It didn't belong there. It didn't belong in that room, in the middle of the night, right next to me. I froze. For a second, I couldn't even react. My brain was trying to catch up with what had just happened. I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. But none of it made sense. My first thought was still my brother. It had to be him. So I turned slightly and called out to him, my voice shaky. I asked if he heard that, if he was messing with me. From his room, all I got was a tired groan. The kind someone makes when they're half asleep and annoyed at being woken up. That alone should have calmed me down, but it didn't. If anything, it made things worse, because if it wasn't him, then who or what was it? I tried again, louder this time, asking if he had just come out of the bathroom. Maybe he had walked past me. Maybe that explained the footsteps. But there was no response this time. Just silence. That heavy, thick silence again. And suddenly, staying there didn't feel like an option anymore. I didn't wait to figure anything else out. I didn't look around. I didn't check under the bed or behind me. I just got up and ran. I ran out of that basement as fast as I could, taking the stairs two at a time, not even caring if I made noise. The only thing on my mind was getting as far away from that room as possible. I made it to my mum's room and practically threw myself into her bed. I don't even remember what I said, or if I explained anything clearly. I just knew I wasn't going back down there that night, and I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, staring into the dark, replaying everything in my head over and over again. The feeling, the mattress lifting, the footsteps, the laughter. It didn't feel like a dream. It didn't feel like imagination. It felt real. What made it worse is that this wasn't the only strange thing that happened to me growing up. My family moved a lot. My parents were divorced, and money wasn't always stable. So we ended up living in around 7 different houses over 8 years. Different neighborhoods, different layouts, different environments, but the feeling followed. Not always the exact same experience, but the same kind of moments. That sense of being watched. Small, unexplainable sounds. The feeling that something was there when it shouldn't be, no matter where we went. At first, I tried to explain it away every time. New house, new noises, pipes, floors, air vents. Your brain can play tricks on you, especially when you're young. That's what I kept telling myself. But that night in the basement always stood out, because it wasn't just a feeling. There was movement, there was sound. There was something that interacted with the space around me in a way that didn't feel natural. Even now, thinking back on it, I can still hear that laughter. I can still feel the shift of the mattress beneath me. And what stays with me the most is how close it was. Whatever it wasn't across the room. It wasn't in the hallway. It was right next to me, close enough to touch. And that's the part I've never been able to fully explain. When I was around 10 or 11, I was living in Auckland, New Zealand, in a neighborhood that had its rough patches. Nights could feel quiet, almost peaceful, and other times tense, like you never knew what might happen around the corner. I remember one night in particular because it still sticks with me clearly, even after all these years. I was lying on my bed, completely absorbed in a Harry Potter book. I can't remember exactly which one it was. I think it might have been the 5th or 6th. But I do remember being lost in the story, imagining spells, adventures, and all the magical chaos that Harry always seemed to get into. My bed was pushed up against the only window in my room, which spanned almost the entire length of the wall. The window wasn't very high off the ground, maybe about a foot above my bed. It made me feel cozy to lie there, reading and staring out occasionally at the dark street beyond, but also a little exposed. Suddenly, for no reason I could explain, I pulled my blanket over myself. I was lying on my stomach, and almost instinctively, I wrapped the thick duvet over my body and pulled it up over my head, as if it could shield me from something I didn't even know existed yet. It wasn't a conscious decision, and there was no warning, no noise, no feeling, nothing to suggest danger. But almost immediately after I did that, I heard a loud crash. The sound of glass shattering made my heart stop. I felt pieces of something hit the duvet on top of me. I remember a sharp, heavy thunk against the floor near my bed, and I froze completely. For a few seconds, 10, maybe 20, I held my breath, unsure of what had just happened. My mind raced, but I stayed completely still, almost hoping that whatever it was would go away. Finally, curiosity, or maybe a desperate need to understand, got the better of me. I slowly peeked out from under the blanket, my head just barely lifting enough to see. That's when I realized what had struck me in my cover. Shards of glass, broken from the window, were scattered all over my bed and floor. I froze even more, my stomach sinking as I realized how close I had come to being cut. Then I saw him. Outside the window, standing just beyond the broken glass, was a man. He was staring straight at me. I can still see his eyes in my mind, the intensity, the focus, the fact that it felt like he was staring not just at the window but right at me. We locked eyes for a moment, and terror flooded through me like a wave. My body shook, and without thinking, I ducked fully under the duvet, covering myself as best I could. Almost immediately, my family rushed into the room. My parents were yelling, asking what had happened. I lifted a small part of the cover and told them quickly, almost breathless, that something had come through the window, a brick, and that a man was standing outside. I could feel the shards pressing against the duvet, but somehow, miraculously, the blanket had protected me. Every piece of glass that hit me had landed on the cover instead of my skin. My parents were frantic but careful. My mum stayed calm enough to give instructions. She told me not to move. She and my dad carefully removed any visible shards of glass from the duvet before lifting me out of the bed. The rest of the glass covered the floor too densely for them to walk in barefoot, so they grabbed shoes and made a careful path to get me out safely. I remember thinking, even as the adrenaline faded, how strange it all was. How had I known to pull the cover over me at exactly that moment? There had been no warning, no noise, nothing to suggest anything was wrong. I had simply acted on instinct, and that instinct had protected me from being seriously injured. My mum, with her usual blend of comfort and spirituality, said quietly, "God is watching out for you." I wanted to believe that, but even now I can't explain it. It was almost as if some invisible force had guided me to act in the exact right way. The police came soon after. They carefully checked the broken window, the shards, and the area outside. I gave my statement, recounting everything I had seen, including the man. He was gone by the time they arrived, and no one was able to identify him. I don't remember if the police had any leads, but I know I never saw him again. I slept in another room for about a week until the window was replaced and the furniture near the window was moved or replaced. Even then, I felt uneasy whenever I returned to that room. I think about that night often, especially when I consider how close I was to being seriously hurt. Had I not pulled the blanket over me at that exact second, the glass would have hit my body directly. I would have been cut badly. The thought still sends shivers down my spine. I don't know why I acted as I did. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was a protective reflex I didn't understand. Or maybe, like my mom said, something unseen was looking out for me. Whatever it was, it saved me. I remember the fear, the surreal feeling of seeing someone standing outside my window, and the shock of realizing just how narrowly I had escaped injury. Even after all these years, I can replay that moment vividly, from the sound of the glass breaking to the feeling of the duvet shielding me. That night taught me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes we act in ways we don't understand, and sometimes it's those unexplainable actions that protect us in ways nothing else can. I still don't know why I covered myself at that exact moment. I don't know why the brick came through my window or who that man was. I don't know why I survived without a scratch, but I do know that I did survive, and that memory and the instinct that saved me stays with me to this day. About 4 years ago, something happened that still doesn't sit right with me, no matter how many times I try to explain it logically. It was supposed to be a normal trip, me, my brother, and a close friend, all heading out for a snowboarding week. We were driving through Vermont late at night, making our way toward a cabin we had rented deep in the mountains. The roads were quiet, the kind of empty where you can go minutes without seeing another car. Just trees on both sides and darkness stretching endlessly ahead. I was sitting in the passenger seat, half awake, just staring out into the night. It was one of those peaceful drives where nothing really happens, and your mind kind of drifts. That's when I noticed it. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, like maybe it was a reflection or some distant car light. But then it became impossible to ignore. There was this deep, bright red glow coming from somewhere far off in the woods. Not a flicker, not moving like headlights, but steady and huge. I leaned forward a little, trying to focus, and that's when it really hit me. The light wasn't just a point or a beam, it had shape. It looked like a dome, like a massive red bubble of light rising from within the forest. It didn't stretch across the sky like an aurora or anything natural like that. It felt contained, almost like it had boundaries, but the brightness was unreal. It wasn't lighting up the entire sky, but the area around it was glowing in a way that didn't make sense. I asked my brother if he could see it, and immediately both him and our friend went quiet. That silence told me everything. They saw it too. We slowed the car down without even really discussing it. Nobody said anything for a few seconds, just trying to process what we were looking at. The road curved slightly, giving us a clearer view, and the light just stayed there, steady, intense, and completely out of place. It didn't move, didn't flicker like fire, didn't behave like anything we could easily explain. Eventually, we decided to pull over. There was a small gas station up ahead, the kind of place that looks like it's been there forever, probably serving the same small group of locals for decades. We parked and stepped out, and the cold air hit us immediately. But even that didn't matter, because all of our attention was locked on that red light in the distance. What made it even stranger was that we weren't the only ones watching it. There were about 6 other people standing outside the gas station, all facing the same direction, all staring at the same thing. That alone made my stomach drop a little. It wasn't just us imagining things. This was real enough that other people had noticed and stopped what they were doing to look. We walked over to them, and one of them, an older guy who looked like he'd lived in the area his whole life, started talking to us. He told us that there was nothing out there, no buildings, no factories, no power stations, just forest, miles and miles of it. The way he said it made it clear he wasn't guessing. He knew that land. That's when things got even worse. Almost immediately after he said that, like the timing couldn't have been more perfect or more unsettling, the red light changed. It didn't fade or move away. It collapsed inward. That's the only way I can describe it. It was like the entire dome suddenly pulled into itself, shrinking rapidly for a second, like it was being sucked into a single point. And then it exploded outward, not like a fireball or anything you'd expect. It burst into this intense white light, way brighter than before. For a moment, it lit up the entire area. The trees, the road, even the gas station. It was like everything got washed in this cold, artificial brightness. It didn't feel natural at all. It was too clean, too sudden. Nobody said a word. We all just stood there, frozen, watching it happen. Then, about 10 seconds after that burst of white light, we felt it. A strong gust of wind came rushing toward us, straight from the direction of where the light had been. It wasn't a light breeze either. It hit hard enough that you could feel it push against you like a sudden wave. I've spent a lot of time hiking in the mountains, so I have a decent sense of wind speeds, and I'd easily put it somewhere around 15 to 25 miles per hour. What made it unsettling wasn't just the strength, but the timing. The wind didn't build up gradually like normal. It came in suddenly, like it was following whatever had just happened with the light. Like the air itself reacted after the fact. After that, the light started to fade. Slowly at first, then more noticeably. The white glow dimmed, and whatever was left of the red began to disappear into the darkness. It didn't just vanish instantly. It took time, maybe around 10 minutes before it was completely gone, leaving behind nothing but the empty forest and the quiet night. We stood there for a bit longer, just trying to process everything. No one really had anything useful to say. There were a few guesses thrown around, maybe some kind of explosion, maybe something electrical, but none of it really fit what we had just seen. The shape of the light, the way it collapsed and then burst, the delayed wind, it all felt too strange to fit into any normal explanation. Eventually, we got back into the car and continued our drive. The mood had completely changed. No music, no jokes, nothing. Just silence. Every one of us was stuck in our own thoughts, replaying what had happened, trying to make sense of it. Even now, years later, I still think about that night. I've tried to come up with logical explanations, maybe some rare atmospheric phenomenon, or some kind of distant industrial accident that looked different from afar. But nothing really lines up perfectly. The fact that locals didn't recognize it, that it appeared so suddenly, changed so dramatically, and then disappeared just as strangely, it doesn't sit right. It wasn't just something we saw. It was something we felt. The kind of experience that stays with you, not because you understand it, but because you don't. And no matter how much time passes, that red dome of light in the middle of nowhere, deep in the forests of Vermont, still feels just as unreal and unsettling as it did in that moment. I was probably around 8 years old when I first noticed something strange from my bedroom window. It was one of those summer nights where the air is still and quiet, and everything outside seems sharper, more alive in the darkness. I was staring out at my neighbor's truck, which sat in the same spot every night. Nothing about the truck was unusual, just an old pickup, parked like it always had been. But that night, something moved behind the neighbor's house. At first, I thought it was another neighbor, maybe someone walking their dog, but then I saw a figure, unusually short, maybe less than 3 or 4 feet tall. This little person, or creature I wasn't sure, hopped out from behind the house and climbed into the back of the truck bed. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. It dug around in the bed for a moment, then hopped out. It crawled under the truck for a while and hopped back into the bed again. There was something so deliberate about the movements, so purposeful, that it immediately caught my full attention. I kept watching for 10, maybe 20 minutes, mesmerized, and then something even stranger happened. The figure looked up and our eyes met, or at least that's what it felt like. Time slowed. My 8-year-old mind didn't know whether to scream, run, or just stay frozen. The figure shifted slowly into a squatting position, its head barely over the edge of the truck bed. We didn't move, didn't blink, just held each other's gaze. I have no idea how long that moment lasted. It could have been seconds, it could have been minutes. It felt eternal. And then my mom nudged me. My head snapped toward her, confused and slightly annoyed for being disturbed. And when I looked back toward the truck, the figure was gone, just like that. Vanished. I don't know if I had been half asleep, partially dreaming, or if I had really seen something impossible. For a full week after that, I kept vigil at my window, staring at that truck, expecting to see it again. But the yard remained quiet every night. Eventually, the truck itself was totaled in an accident, and I never saw anything like it again. Years later, at 16, I had another encounter that shook me in a completely different way. I remember my age clearly because I had a lingering frustration with my friends constantly asking me to drive them around. That summer, it was probably around 1 a.m., and my friends and I were wandering around our neighborhood exploring, or maybe just wandering to the gas station. We were night owls, and late-night walks were our thing. Not far from my house, less than a block away, there was a fenced-in storage area full of junk vehicles, piles of old wood, leaves, and random debris. Most kids would have avoided it, but we never did. As we walked past the fence, I caught sight of something moving along the ground. At first, I thought it was a stray animal, a cat maybe, but then I realized it was unlike any cat I had ever seen. It was small, no more than a foot tall, walking upright on two legs. Its body was strange, red, hairless, with exaggeratedly long ears and a long, thin tail that flicked behind it. It skittered across the pavement with jerky, unnatural movements, and then, in a sudden motion, leapt behind a parked car. I stopped and pointed it out to my friends, but they ignored me. They thought I was just imagining things or overreacting, chalking it up to a stray animal in the dark. We continued walking alongside the fence toward the yard where it had disappeared, and then I heard it. A voice, or maybe multiple voices, soft-spoken but strange and urgent, coming from the direction of the car. The sounds were impossible to decipher. Part whisper, part yell, all mixed together in a way that made my stomach drop. Before I could process it fully, the little figure lunged at the fence with a hiss that sounded more like a warning than an animal's cry. It bolted before I could react further. The suddenness and aggression made my heart race, and in a blur of panic, we all ran. One of my friends was so scared that he peed himself, and I couldn't blame him. I don't think any of us spoke much until we were safely back at my house, out of sight of that strange fence. For months after that, I refused to take my usual morning walks in that area. Something about the way it moved, the way it watched us, and the voices I heard left a lasting impression. Since then, I haven't had anything remotely like those experiences. The neighborhood, the fence, the trucks, all became just ordinary things again. But those nights, those brief, inexplicable moments stayed with me. I never figured out what I saw. Was it a trick of the light, a hallucination, or something completely outside my understanding? I don't know, and maybe I never will. But even now, thinking back, the memories make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I can still feel that strange, intense mix of curiosity, fear, and awe that comes with realizing you've seen something the world can't explain. The first time I ever went to my friend's house, I was about 15, and I remember getting this strange feeling the moment I stepped inside. It wasn't anything obvious. The house looked normal. Everything was in place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But there was just something about it that didn't sit right with me. It felt heavy, like the air itself was off. I couldn't fully relax, no matter how hard I tried. At the time, I didn't say anything. It felt silly to bring up something so vague, especially when there was no real reason for it, so I just ignored it and carried on like everything was fine. We hung out, played games, talked about random stuff like teenagers do. From the outside, it was just another normal visit. But that feeling never really went away. It stayed in the back of my mind the entire time, like a quiet warning I couldn't explain. As I started spending more time at his house over the years, I got to know his family better. That's when things started to get a little strange. His mom would sometimes talk about things happening in the house, things she couldn't explain. She wasn't dramatic about it either. That's what made it more unsettling. She spoke about it like it was just part of her life, something she had learned to live with. She told us she refused to sleep in one of the bedrooms because she always felt like someone was watching her in there. Not just a passing feeling, but something constant and intense enough that she couldn't ignore it. She also told us about hearing footsteps on the stairs late at night, not quiet creaks or random noises, but clear, fast footsteps like someone running up and down. One time, she said it got so loud and so frequent that she finally lost her patience. She thought it was her kids messing around, so she went to the stairs, ready to yell at them to stop. But when she got there and looked around, the house was empty. All the kids were outside. There was no one inside who could have made those sounds. Even hearing her tell these stories, my friend and I didn't take it too seriously at first. A lot of people have weird stories about their homes. Old houses make noises, imaginations fill in the gaps, and sometimes things just feel strange for no clear reason. We joked about it more than anything. It became one of those topics we'd bring up just to mess with each other. Still, that feeling I had the first time I walked into the house never completely disappeared. No matter how used to the place I got, there was always something slightly off about it. Years went by like that. Nothing directly happened to me, and nothing major seemed to happen to my friend either. It was just stories, small moments, and that constant, uneasy atmosphere. Then his parents decided to renovate the house. They changed things around, updated rooms, and one of the biggest changes was that the old bedroom his mom refused to sleep in was turned into an upstairs living room. You'd think that changing the space might change whatever was causing those feelings. Maybe make it feel more normal. Maybe even get rid of whatever weirdness people had been experiencing. But that's not what happened. One night, my friend was upstairs in that new living room watching his young nephew. The kid was about 3 or 4 years old, just a toddler. It was a quiet night, and nothing unusual going on. Just the TV on. A calm, normal moment. At some point, my friend noticed something odd. His nephew was looking off toward a doorway that led into a small room next to the living room. It was just a simple open doorway, nothing special about it. But the kid wasn't just looking. He was waving. Not randomly, not absent-mindedly. He was clearly waving at something, like he saw someone standing there. At first, my friend probably thought it was just a kid being a kid. Imaginary friends, random behavior, nothing unusual at that age. Still, something about it must have felt off, because he asked him what he was doing. The nephew didn't hesitate. He pointed straight toward that small room and said very casually, "I'm waving at the girl." Just like that. No confusion, no hesitation, like it was completely normal. My friend didn't laugh it off. He didn't try to explain it away. Something about the way the kid said it, or maybe just everything we already knew about that house, hit him all at once. He didn't stick around to figure it out. He immediately picked his nephew up and took him downstairs. After that, things changed for both of us. Up until then, we could joke about the stories. We could brush them off as coincidences or imagination. But that moment felt different. A little kid, too young to make up something like that in a convincing way, calmly saying he was waving at someone who wasn't there. Someone in a part of the house that already had a history of strange things happening. It wasn't funny anymore. From that point on, we both agreed that something about that house wasn't right. We didn't try to prove it, and we didn't care if other people believed us or not. We just knew how it felt, and we knew what had happened. Even now, when I think back to the first time I walked into that house and felt that quiet sense of unease, it all seems to line up. Like whatever was there had always been there, and we just didn't fully realize it until that moment. I still can't explain it. I don't know what was in that house, or if there was really anything there at all. But I do know that some places just feel wrong, and that house was definitely one of them. When I was about 15, I had one of the scariest experiences of my life, something that I still remember vividly even now. I was up late in my room reading, just trying to enjoy a quiet night by myself. It was probably around 10 or 11, that calm time when the house is silent, everyone else asleep, and the world outside is dark and still. I was lying on the bottom bunk of a bunk bed, completely absorbed in my book, when it started. At first it was subtle, a gentle bump, almost like someone had nudged the mattress from underneath. I froze, unsure what it was, thinking maybe I was imagining things. The bump happened again, and this time it felt stronger, like a deliberate push. My heart started pounding, my palms got sweaty, and I felt this growing sense of panic. The bumps didn't stop there. Each one grew stronger and harder, making the mattress move visibly. It was no longer subtle. My initial thought was that it could be a cat, our family pet, but I had already put him in the laundry room for the night, and the door was closed. I was certain it wasn't him. I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me, the kind that makes your body feel frozen in place, unable to move, unable to even scream. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, unable to comprehend what was happening. I tried to calm myself down, rationalize it, tell myself it was just my imagination or a trick of the late-night shadows, but my eyes kept catching the mattress moving on its own. The physical movement was undeniable. My brain struggled to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew was possible. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage I had, I decided to wake my sister. She slept in the top bunk directly above me, and I didn't know what else to do. I climbed up and whispered for her to get in bed with me, asking her to just sit still for a minute while I tried to figure out what was going on. I didn't tell her what had happened because I wasn't sure if I would even be believed. Almost immediately, the mattress moved again. She froze too, and asked in a voice barely above a whisper what that was. The movement was getting stronger with every bump, almost like something was physically pushing the mattress upward from below. It was terrifying. I tried to make sense of it, thinking maybe there was a loose floorboard, a rodent, or some other explanation. I grabbed my phone, using its light to check under the bed, expecting to see maybe a rat or a mouse, or even something that could have slipped in from under the floor. But there was absolutely nothing. The space under the bed was empty, no signs of intrusion, no objects that could explain what we were feeling, nothing. And yet, the mattress continued to move, almost rhythmically, with a force that made me genuinely believe something was beneath me, trying to make contact. We sat together, tense and frozen, watching the mattress move. I remember feeling completely powerless, like my body was incapable of reacting to the fear. Our hearts were racing, and we whispered prayers, trying to calm ourselves and call on some kind of protection. The feeling was so real, so physical, that I could almost feel the pressure, the weight, and the presence pressing against the mattress. It was like someone or something was right there, just beneath me, watching and testing my courage. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and quick, and I could see my sister's eyes wide with terror, reflecting the dim light from my phone. We were both frozen in disbelief, caught between wanting to move and being terrified of what would happen if we did. Eventually, I decided we had to know for sure what it was. Summoning every ounce of bravery, I used my phone light to shine under the bed once again, scanning every corner, every inch of the dark space beneath. Nothing. It was completely empty. The mattress moved again, harder than before, almost like a punch from underneath. I jumped back instinctively, heart pounding, and felt the mattress shift violently under me. My sister gasped, clutching my arm, and we both sat there frozen, wondering how this could be happening. The logical part of my mind screamed that there had to be a rational explanation, but the physical reality we were experiencing made it impossible to ignore the terror. Something had interacted with the mattress, and we had seen and felt it with our own eyes. After several long moments that felt like hours, we decided to run together to our parents' room. We counted to 3 and bolted, almost tripping over the bed and the floor in our haste. My parents woke up groggy and confused, and I explained as best as I could what had just happened. My dad came back with us to the room to investigate, shining a flashlight across the floor and under the bed. There was nothing. No sign of intrusion, no pets, no drafts, no loose floorboards. Everything was perfectly normal, except for the lingering feeling of something unseen, having been there just moments ago. My parents tried to comfort me, assuring me it was probably just a trick of our imaginations, but I couldn't shake the vividness of the experience. The fear was too real, too physical, too shared to be dismissed. Even years later, I can remember that night in excruciating detail. I remember the way the mattress felt moving beneath me, the weight of my fear, the sound of my sister's voice, and the feeling of complete helplessness. I can recall the moments I spent frozen in place, trying to rationalize the impossible. I have often wondered if it was some kind of paranormal experience, a sleep phenomenon, or just a trick of the mind amplified by fear and adrenaline. The combination of being on a bottom bunk, the quiet of the house, and our heightened emotional state could have created something that felt real beyond reason. But even with that rationalization, it does not explain the physicality of the mattress moving or the shared experience between my sister and me. That part remains unexplainable. I have not had a similar experience since, and I can only imagine how deeply it affected me at the time. It is a memory that still makes my stomach tighten and my heart race when I recall it. It taught me about fear, vulnerability, and how the mind and body can react to situations we don't fully understand. The sheer intensity of that night, the complete terror and helplessness, the undeniable physical presence of something unseen, all of it has left an imprint on my memory that I will carry for the rest of my life. It was one of those moments where you realize how fragile the sense of safety you feel in your own home can be, and how easily the world can feel completely out of control, even in a place that should be secure. That night, the mattress continued to move in ways I could never explain. The fear remained palpable, and the shared terror with my sister made it all the more real. It was one of those experiences that defies logical explanation, something that cannot easily be forgotten, something that stays with you. And even now, I remember it not just as a childhood memory, but as a profound moment that shaped my understanding of fear, vulnerability, and the unexplained. If you're still here, that already tells me a lot about you. I want to know 2 things. Which story so far feels the most real to you? The one with the truck, the woman under the streetlight, the basement laughter, the girl in the cupboard, or something else? If you had to spend a night alone in just one of these locations, which would you pick? And why? Answer in the comments while you listen. I read through them and I'm always curious how you all think. All right, take a breath. We're going back in. I have a very close friend who lived in a beautiful, old English cottage, the kind of place that feels like it belongs in a storybook. I remember the very first time I went there. I must have been around 21. From the moment I stepped inside, I was struck by how charming and warm the house felt. Everything about it had character. The old wooden beams, the slightly creaking floors, the way the sunlight filtered through the small windows and hit the stone fireplace. But even as I was marveling at the place, there was a strange, sinking feeling in my chest. I couldn't explain it. It was as if I could sense something wasn't quite right in one of the rooms upstairs. I hadn't even seen the upstairs yet, but there was this heaviness in the air that I couldn't shake, like the house itself was holding its breath. When we finally went upstairs, my intuition only grew stronger. There was a room behind us that carried a strange, almost oppressive feeling. I asked my friend whose room it was, and he told me it was just the spare room. I tried to brush it off, thinking I was just being overly sensitive or that it was the unfamiliarity of the old house playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was something about that room that made the hair on my arms stand on end, even though I hadn't even entered it yet. Later that evening, it was decided that I would stay in the spare room. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed how small and cramped it was. There was a single bed, pushed up against a tiny window, and an old cupboard stood opposite, worn and slightly warped with age. The room seemed almost too quiet, like it was holding its breath, and an odd tension filled the air. I tried to settle into the bed, turning my back to the cupboard, hoping that ignoring it would make the uneasy feeling go away. But the tension didn't ease. Instead, it felt thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was watching me. As I lay there trying to sleep, a very vivid and disturbing image began forming in my mind. It started subtly, but soon it became impossible to ignore. I saw a young girl trapped inside the cupboard. Her expression was sunken and melancholy, filled with despair. She stared at me through the wooden panels, completely still, and I could almost feel her panic and fear radiating from her. The image was so intense that it felt as if she was screaming silently, her tiny body struggling for air, unable to escape. I couldn't tell whether she was real or a figment of my imagination, but the feeling of dread was undeniable. I tried to push the vision away, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake it. The image repeated itself, looping in my thoughts, growing more vivid and more desperate each time. It was exhausting, both mentally and physically, because the fear felt real. I could feel my heart racing, my stomach twisting into knots, and my breath catching in my throat. Finally, I had enough. I sat up in the bed, and almost instinctively, I spoke out loud. "I'm sorry, but I'm trying to sleep. Could you knock it off?" It sounded ridiculous, saying it to an empty room, but the moment I did, the tension in the room started to ease. The oppressive weight lifted, the air felt lighter, and somehow the image faded enough that I could finally relax. I drifted into sleep after that, deep and dreamless, though the memory of the girl stayed with me. Years went by, and my friend eventually decided to leave the cottage for good. I was there helping him move out one last time. As we packed boxes and carried furniture, that night from years ago kept creeping back into my mind. I felt compelled to bring it up, to see if he had ever noticed anything similar, or if it had all just been my imagination. "Hey, can I ask you something about this house?" I said cautiously. "Sure, what's up?" he replied, smiling, unaware of what I was going to say. I told him everything, the feeling of dread, the tension in the spare room, and most of all, the image of the young girl trapped inside the cupboard, silent and desperate. His reaction stunned me. He froze, and his face went pale. His hands started shaking, and he didn't say a word for a long time. I asked if he was okay, but he could only nod, tears brimming in his eyes. "When I was a kid," he finally whispered, voice trembling, "I used to have this same dream over and over again. It was like a waking nightmare. The girl would cry and scream my name for help, telling me she couldn't breathe. And in the dream, something would hold me down on my bed. My parents would eventually wake up and find me crying, banging on the wooden door of that cupboard, screaming for her. I never knew how I got there, but I could always hear her cries, and I could always feel her fear." I couldn't believe it. Both of us, years apart, had experienced the same thing in the same room. He as a child in his dreams, Aunt and me as a visitor in the spare room. It was impossible to explain, and it left me feeling both terrified and awestruck. How could our minds, separated by years, perceive the same thing in such a vivid, real way? Could it all have been a coincidence, or was there something in that room that was far beyond our understanding? Even now, when I think about it, I feel that same tension in my chest, the same tightness in the air that I felt that first night. The memory of the girl trapped in the cupboard is still vivid in my mind, her desperate, silent screams echoing in my imagination. The house was filled with charm and beauty, but the spare room carried a shadow that neither of us can explain. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who believes in science and logic, but that night in the spare room challenged everything I thought I knew. Was it a trick of the mind? Some psychological projection of fear and imagination? Or was there truly something in that cupboard, in that room, that had lingered for decades? I may never know. Even years later, the image sometimes drifts into my mind when I close my eyes. Not as sharp, not as immediate, but enough to make me pause, enough to remind me that there are things in the world we cannot explain. The girl in the cupboard, the intense dread, and the weight of that room are etched into my memory forever. That cottage, with all its beauty and charm, carries a presence I will never forget, a presence that exists somewhere between memory, dream, and reality, and a reminder that some experiences are too strange to be dismissed, too vivid to be ignored, and too unsettling to ever truly leave you. This happened back in 2002, at the house my family had moved into a couple of years earlier. I was in high school then, living with my parents. It wasn't an old house, in fact it was fairly new, located in a nice populated subdivision. My family was the first to live there, so everything was still fresh, clean, and homey. It was one of those houses that felt warm and cozy, the kind of place where you immediately feel comfortable, and for the first few years, life there was normal. There weren't any strange occurrences, no weird noises or feelings, just a regular family home. At the time, my mum worked at a resort hotel with shifts that usually ran from early morning, around 6, to mid-afternoon. Her days off rotated every week, so I never really knew when she'd be home until I saw her still sleeping in bed when I woke up. On her days off, she usually wouldn't prepare breakfast because she'd wake up early to go to work while my sister and I were still asleep. My dad traveled a lot for work, often gone for long periods. During the period when this happened, my younger sister was spending her school break at my grandparents' house, so it was just me at home. I had decided to spend my break gaming. This was during the early days of MMORPGs, so I was deep into whatever was popular at the time, probably RuneScape, Ragnarok Online, or Neverwinter Nights. I played so much back then that the real world often blurred with the virtual one. One day, I woke up quite late after staying up until the early hours of the morning gaming. It was already around noon. I got up, stretched, and made my way to the kitchen, expecting to find some food, maybe breakfast leftovers, or at least a snack prepared by my mom. But the kitchen was empty. Normally, I'd assume she was still sleeping if there was nothing prepared, but in this case I couldn't be sure. It was school break, and the house was quiet. I figured she either skipped breakfast or was still asleep. I didn't check her room, and I still regret that decision. Instead, I just went ahead and cooked myself some food, sat in front of the TV, and ate while watching whatever show or cartoon was on. Then, feeling satisfied, I returned to my computer and dove back into my game, fully believing I was completely alone in the house. A few minutes into my game, I heard what sounded like someone getting out of bed and moving around in the house. It sounded like my mum, so I called out, "Hi, Mum, didn't know it was your day off." After a few seconds, I heard a weak, lazy, almost sickly voice say, "Yeah." I figured she was just tired, as she often was on her days off. I didn't think much of it and continued playing, glancing occasionally towards the sounds of her footsteps in the kitchen behind me. I heard her sip water, shuffle around, and then return to her room. When I caught a glimpse of her back and hair as she walked away, I assumed it was her, fully confident there was nothing strange going on. A little while later, I needed to stretch and decided to check on her. I quietly opened the door to her room, expecting to see her sleeping. I caught sight of her tucked in bed, just the tips of her feet, her arms, shoulders, part of her face, and her hair visible. I thought, "Yep, that's Mom," and didn't feel scared at all. It was comforting. I quietly closed the door, careful not to disturb her, and returned to my game, fully convinced everything was normal. Hours passed. Then, unexpectedly, I heard the car pulling into the garage. My first thought was, "Oh, she went out, didn't notice her leave." I didn't think anything of it. She came in holding a few grocery bags, a little irritated to see me still in front of the computer. "Oh, still on that, huh?" she asked, not unkindly, but with that tone parents often have when they see you glued to a screen for hours. Then she asked the question that would completely shatter my perception of what had just happened. "So, what did you eat today?" I, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation, answered, "I cooked myself some food. Thought you had some leftovers." My mind still caught up in the haze of gaming. I hadn't even processed what she was saying. She looked at me, bewildered, holding the plate with the leftovers I had eaten hours earlier. Then she said, in a tone that made my heart drop, "What are you talking about? Leftovers? This? Idiot, I just came home from work." I froze. My brain tried to process what she had just said, but it was like a brick wall slammed into my chest. I had seen her in her bed earlier. I had heard her moving around the kitchen. I had spoken to her, albeit briefly. I had even seen her back and hair as she walked to her room. All of that had been not her. I felt the kind of panic that's hard to describe, an icy realization that something unexplainable had just happened. My pulse raced, my palms got sweaty, and my stomach churned. I tried to recount everything I had seen and heard to her, But the more I spoke, the more confused we both became. She immediately called everyone she could think of, uncles, aunts, cousins, other family members, to come over to the house. We sat there, all trying to rationalize what had just occurred. People suggested every possible explanation. Perhaps I was just sleep-deprived from staying up all night gaming, they said. Maybe my imagination was running wild because I was addicted to video games. Perhaps it was a trick of the light, or my brain was creating hallucinations similar to what people experience when deprived of sleep or overstimulated by screens. Everyone wanted a logical explanation, but none of them could account for the reality of the event. To them, it was just a case of overindulgence and exhaustion. That night, I didn't stay in the house. I went out with some friends, had a few drinks, smoked a bit of pot, and stayed at a buddy's place. I didn't return home until the next morning, at which point I packed my things and went to my grandparents' house, determined not to be alone in that house again. I would never spend time alone there for any extended period again, not until we eventually moved years later. Looking back, the experience was terrifying at the time, but it also ended up shaping me in ways I didn't expect. I realized how isolated I had become from spending hours glued to the computer. I had neglected social interactions, sports, and other activities I enjoyed before gaming became my obsession. That incident forced me out of the house, made me spend time with friends, and even led me to rediscover extracurricular activities and sports I had once loved. I learned to balance my time, to engage with the world outside my room, and to not become consumed by virtual life alone. Even now, when I think back, I still get chills. The way I had seen my mom in bed, hearing her voice, sensing her moving around the house, and then discovering she hadn't even left her room, it's something I cannot explain. I try to rationalize it in every way possible, but the memory remains vivid. It's one of those moments in life where logic fails, and all you can do is wonder, was it a trick of my mind? Was it sleep deprivation? Or was it something else entirely? I may never know. But one thing is certain, that day changed me. It broke me out of my routine, forced me to engage with the real world, and ultimately gave me a new perspective on life outside of gaming. The fear and confusion eventually faded. But the memory of that inexplicable experience has stayed with me for nearly 2 decades. It's a story I can never fully understand, but it taught me lessons I never would have learned otherwise. About 4 years ago, I was working as a counselor at a Christian teen camp with my buddy Todd. Everyone called him Superman Todd, and not just as a joke. The guy really wasn't afraid of anything. Heights, bugs, creepy woods, late-night pranks, you name it. He'd dive right in without hesitation. But there was something about Todd that made him different from most fearless people. He had this instinct, this gut feeling about things. Sometimes it freaked him out so badly that even he, who feared almost nothing, would pause and look around like he'd just seen something he shouldn't have. Whenever that happened, I knew to pay attention, because if Todd was uneasy, something was definitely off. It was one of those late nights after camp had wrapped up. Todd and I were driving home together, so talking about the day's events and laughing about minor disasters that always happened at camp. Someone spilling paint, someone else falling in the lake, kids trying to prank us and failing miserably. We decided to stop in a small town along the way to grab some food. It was around 9 p.m., dark, but not completely empty. A few cars passed by and some late-night shop lights flickered, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. We finished eating and stepped back onto the street, heading toward our car. It was one of those streets that seemed ordinary during the day, but had a strange, almost eerie quiet at night. As we rounded the corner, Todd suddenly stopped and looked at me. "Hey man," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Let's take another route. This way doesn't feel right." I wanted to get home and wasn't in the mood to take detours. "Come on, Todd, quit whining," I said, brushing off his comment. "Let's just go this way. We're fine." I didn't see the urgency he did, but as soon as we turned the next corner, I instantly understood what he had felt. Across the street, under a flickering street lamp, was a woman. At first I thought maybe she was drunk or having some sort of mental episode, but the moment I registered her actions, I froze. She was hitting herself, literally beating herself, over and over. Her movements were frantic, uncontrolled, and terrifying in their intensity. Todd, without a second thought, started walking toward her. He always did that, faced the danger head on. Me? I instinctively stepped back, unsure what to do, my heart starting to pound. Todd approached cautiously, raising his hands as if to calm her. "Hey, what's your name?" he called out, his voice gentle but firm. At that moment, the woman stopped her movements for a split second. She looked at him and, almost politely, said, "Hi, I'm Ashley." Then, just as suddenly, she resumed hitting herself. I was confused. Todd's face was calm at first, but I noticed a flicker of unease. There was something in her eyes, in the way she moved, that didn't add up. The politeness and the violence coexisted in a way that was deeply unsettling. And then, without any warning, she shifted. Her anger erupted like a firestorm. She screamed at the top of her lungs, "Fuck you, Mrs. Stranger Danger! Fuck you, Todd! And fuck your God!" I froze in shock. My stomach dropped, a cold wave of fear rushing over me. I'd never heard anything like that before. The volume, the rage, the precision of the words, it was terrifying. Todd, who had faced countless challenges and never flinched, took a cautious step back, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. We didn't stick around to argue or reason with her. That was the one moment when both of us didn't hesitate. We backed away slowly, eyes locked on her the entire time, until we were far enough to cross the street. Neither of us looked back until we were safely down the block, moving toward our car. My heart was still hammering, my mind trying to process what had just happened. Todd didn't say a word for a while, just kept glancing over his shoulder, his usual composure shaken. On the drive home, I kept replaying the scene in my mind. How could someone act that way? How could she suddenly switch from polite to screaming such violent words, seemingly out of nowhere? It didn't make any sense. I've seen people who were drunk, high, or mentally unstable, but this was something different. There was an energy there, something unexplainable, almost otherworldly. Even now, thinking back to that night gives me chills. I've thought about it many times, tried to rationalize it in every way possible. Mental illness, a traumatic breakdown, even a sudden psychotic episode. But none of that really captures the intensity of what we saw, the way she moved, the words she shouted, the sheer force of it. It's not something you just forget. Todd and I never talked much about it afterward, at least not in detail. We'd nod at each other whenever it came up, both silently acknowledging that we had seen something we couldn't explain. It's one of those moments that stays with you, an experience that lingers at the edge of your mind, reminding you that sometimes reality is far stranger and darker than anything you expect. That night changed the way I look at people in certain situations, the way I trust my instincts, and the way I think about fear. Even the bravest of us, like Todd, can be unsettled by something that doesn't fit into the normal world. And as for me, I learned that sometimes it's best to listen to that instinct and walk away, even if it doesn't make sense. Some things aren't meant to be understood. It happened during a time when my ex-girlfriend was really unwell. She had been sick for a few days, the kind of sickness that drains all your energy and makes you want to sleep constantly. That day, I had to leave for a late shift at work, so I made sure she was comfortable before I left. I remember she had been in bed all day, barely moving, just sleeping on and off. Earlier that afternoon, something strange had already happened, but at the time I didn't fully understand how serious it was. She suddenly woke up screaming, not just startled, but full-on panic, like she was genuinely terrified for her life. I rushed into the bedroom, and what I saw immediately put me on edge. She was pressed into the corner of the bed, almost trying to get as far away from something as possible. Her eyes were wide. It completely locked on the plant we had sitting in the corner of the room. She kept pointing at it, her hand shaking and saying, "Who is that? They're trying to kill me." Over and over again, like she was seeing something that wasn't there, or maybe something I couldn't see. I tried to calm her down. I told her there was nothing there, that it was just the plant, that she was safe, but she wasn't really listening. It felt like she was stuck in whatever she was seeing, like my voice couldn't reach her properly. After a few minutes, though, her energy just dropped. She sort of curled up into herself, still looking scared, and then just fell back asleep. It was so sudden that it almost felt unnatural, like someone had flipped a switch. I stood there for a bit, just staring at her, trying to figure out what had just happened. I figured maybe it was a fever dream or something related to her being sick. People hallucinate sometimes when they have high fevers, right? That's what I told myself anyway. Eventually I left for work, but the whole thing stayed in the back of my mind the entire shift. By the time I got home, it was really late. The apartment was completely quiet. No lights on, no sound, just that stillness you get in the middle of the night. I walked into the bedroom and saw that she was still asleep, in the same general position as before. That part at least felt normal. I didn't want to wake her, so I kept everything quiet. I grabbed a quick shower, got changed, and tried to wind down a bit before going to bed. Nothing felt out of place yet, but I couldn't shake that uneasy feeling from earlier. When I finally walked back into the bedroom, the lights were still off. The only light was whatever faint glow was coming in from outside, just enough to make out shapes in the dark. That's when I noticed something strange. There were these dark patches on the bed. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. They looked like shadows, but they didn't quite behave like shadows. They were too solid, too uneven. It was like there were multiple black shapes scattered across the bed, around where she was lying. I froze for a second, just staring. My first thought was that maybe something had spilled, or maybe I was just seeing things because my eyes hadn't adjusted properly yet. But the longer I looked, the less it made sense. I didn't want to wake her up, especially after what had happened earlier, but there was no way I was going to just ignore it. I needed to know what those things were. So I reached over and turned on the light. The second the room lit up, she started screaming. It was instant. No slow waking up, no confusion, just straight into panic, like flipping a switch. It was the same kind of fear as before, maybe even worse. I turned toward her, trying to figure out what was going on, and that's when I noticed the corner of the room, the plant, or what was left of it. It was completely destroyed, not knocked over, not slightly damaged, completely torn apart. The pot was still there, but everything else looked like it had been ripped to pieces. The leaves were gone, the branches were broken, and what remained looked thin and stripped down, almost like one of those sad, bare trees you see in cartoons. Then I looked back at the bed. Those black blotches weren't shadows at all. They were pieces of the plant. Leaves, small branches, bits of it scattered all over the bed, around her, even partially under her. In the dim light earlier, they had just looked like dark shapes, but now it was obvious. She must have done it. At some point while I was at work, or maybe even after I got home and was in the shower, she had gotten up and completely torn that plant apart, and then, somehow, she had gone back to bed like nothing happened. The thought alone made my stomach drop. I looked back at her, still screaming, still panicked, and I didn't even know what to say. Part of me was trying to process the physical mess in the room, and another part was thinking about what she had said earlier, the way she had been pointing at the plant, convinced there was someone there. And now the plant was destroyed. It felt connected, even if I couldn't explain how. I tried to calm her down again, speaking gently, telling her she was okay, that everything was fine. It took a while, but eventually she settled down enough to lie back again. She didn't really explain anything, didn't say what she had seen this time. It was like she was trapped in that same state of fear, but couldn't fully express it. That night, I barely slept. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, occasionally glancing over at the corner where the plant used to be. The room felt different now, like something had shifted, even though I knew logically it was just the aftermath of whatever episode she had. In the morning, things got even stranger in a different way. She woke up like nothing had happened. No fear, no confusion, and no memory of the night before. When I asked her about it, she looked at me like I was talking about someone else. She didn't remember waking up screaming. She didn't remember tearing the plant apart. She didn't remember anything about thinking someone was in the room trying to hurt her. It was just gone. We talked about it for a while, trying to piece things together, but there was nothing to go on. The best explanation we could come up with was that it had something to do with her being sick. Maybe a fever, maybe some kind of intense dream or episode that carried over into waking behavior. But even that didn't fully explain it. The way she had reacted, the things she said, the fact that she physically got up and destroyed something and then went back to sleep without any memory. It all felt too extreme to just brush off. After that, we made a simple decision. No more plants in the bedroom. It sounds small, almost silly, but neither of us wanted to deal with anything like that again. Every time I looked at that corner, I couldn't help but remember her voice, the fear in it, the way she kept asking who was there. And even now, thinking back on it, the part that sticks with me the most isn't just what happened. It's how real it felt in the moment. Like for her, whatever she saw wasn't just in her head. About a year after my grandpa passed away, some strange things started happening around my family, mostly to my mom at first. At the time, we didn't immediately jump to any conclusions, but the small incidents kept piling up in a way that was hard to ignore. It began with little things around the house. My mom would notice that the caps on her shampoo and conditioner bottles were turned around the wrong way. That might not sound like a big deal, but these weren't loose flip caps. They were the kind that are firmly attached and not easy to twist or remove. She was certain she hadn't touched them, and when she asked my dad, he said he hadn't either. It happened more than once, and each time it left her a little more unsettled. Then there were the sounds. While working from home, She would sometimes hear what sounded like paper shuffling in other rooms. It wasn't loud, but it was clear enough to catch her attention. The strange part was that no one else was home at the time. The dogs were always in the same room as her, so it wasn't them moving around either. She would stop what she was doing and listen, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, but it would always stop just as suddenly as it started. At first, she tried to brush it off as normal house noises. Old houses make sounds, things settle, objects shift slightly. But the consistency of these small, odd events made it harder to ignore. Still, life went on, and we didn't really talk about it too much. About 6 months later, we took a trip to visit my grandma. It was about a 3.5-hour drive, and on the way there, my mom told me about something that had happened that very morning. She had gone into the bathroom when she woke up, and everything was completely normal. After that, she went downstairs to have breakfast. My dad got up later and used the bathroom too, and he said everything looked fine when he was in there. But when my mum went back upstairs afterward, something had changed. One of the drawer handles in the bathroom had been loosened. It was a horizontal handle attached at both ends, and one side had been completely unscrewed, leaving the handle hanging down. It wasn't something that could just happen on its own in a few minutes. Someone would have had to physically twist the screw out. She asked my dad about it, but he said he hadn't touched it. That left both of them confused and, honestly, a little uneasy. It was one of those moments where there wasn't any simple explanation. We didn't dwell on it too much because we had things to do once we reached my grandma's place. The trip was meant to take care of important matters, so we spent most of the day out and about. By the time we got back to the hotel that night, we were all exhausted. I stayed in my mom's room for a while before going to my own room next door to sleep. I love my mom, but she snores, and I wanted a decent night's rest after the long day. My room seemed completely normal at first. Nothing felt off when I walked in. But after I settled in, I noticed something strange. The hotel phone on the bedside table was making quiet noises. It sounded like faint static, almost like a walkie-talkie picking up a weak signal. It would come and go, not constant, just enough to notice. I remember thinking it was odd because I had stayed in plenty of hotels before and never experienced anything like that. Still, I ignored it because I was tired and just wanted to sleep. At some point during the night, I woke up. I later checked the time, and it was around 2:45 a.m. I'm not someone who wakes up suddenly and feels fully alert, so at first I was in that half-asleep state where everything feels distant and slow. That's when I started noticing the sounds. There were popping noises coming from different parts of the room. At first, I thought it might be something normal, like the building settling or temperature changes affecting materials. But the longer I lay there, the more I realized how strange it was. The sounds weren't coming from just one place. They were coming from everywhere. The fridge, the lamps, the TV, the heating and cooling unit, everything electrical seemed to be making these sharp, popping noises. Even the walls and ceiling sounded like they were contributing. The noises were loud enough to fully wake me up, and they kept happening at irregular intervals, maybe every 30 seconds to a minute, just enough time in between to make you think it had stopped, only for another one to happen again. I lay there, listening, trying to convince myself it was normal, but the randomness and intensity of it made it hard to ignore. Eventually, I tried to calm myself down by thinking logically. I told myself that even if it was something strange, it wasn't going to hurt me. I just needed to relax and go back to sleep. As I started to settle down, something else happened. The heating and cooling unit suddenly turned on, and I had set it to completely off before going to bed. Not low, not on auto, off. But now it was running, blowing air into the room like someone had switched it on. That was the moment my calm completely disappeared. I sat up, fully awake now, and turned on the lights. The room looked exactly the same, but it didn't feel the same anymore. It felt wrong. I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe distracting myself would help. I opened my browser, and without me typing anything, it loaded a page about getting a good night's sleep. I hadn't searched for anything like that before. It just opened on its own. That was enough for me. I decided I wasn't staying in that room alone anymore. As I got up and started putting on my slippers, the heating and cooling unit made another sound. This time, it didn't fully turn on, but it hummed, like it was about to start again. That pushed me over the edge, and I left the room immediately. I went straight to my mom's room and woke her up. I told her what had been happening, and she decided to come back with me to check it out. Part of me hoped that with her there, everything would seem normal again. We walked into my room together and stood there listening. Nothing. No popping sounds, no strange noises. Everything was completely quiet. My mom looked at me and said she didn't hear anything. For a moment, I started doubting myself, wondering if I had imagined it all in that half-asleep state. Then, out of nowhere, we both heard it. Music started playing. It sounded like an Irish jig, clear and distinct, as if it was coming from inside the room itself. Not from outside, not from another room, not muffled through a wall. It was right there with us. It lasted for about 5 to 10 seconds. My mom even asked me if it was coming from my phone, but it wasn't. My phone wasn't capable of producing that kind of clear, full sound, and I hadn't touched it. As soon as it stopped, we didn't wait around. We left and went back to her room. Nothing happened there. No sounds, no music, nothing unusual at all. I still had to go back to my room a few times the next morning to get ready. While I was in there, I heard a few more popping sounds, though not as intense as during the night. At one point, when I turned on the light, I heard a small jingle, like a notification sound. But again, it wasn't my phone. When we checked out, we mentioned everything to the front desk staff, just to see if anyone else had reported anything similar. The woman there said she hadn't heard of anything like that before, but she seemed really interested in what we experienced. That night remains the only time I've ever had something happen that I truly couldn't explain. Part of me wonders if it had something to do with my grandpa. The timing, the strange events leading up to it, the way things seemed almost playful at times. It felt like something he might do, but at the same time, it was unsettling in a way that's hard to describe. After that, my mom even tried talking out loud, asking him to leave us alone if it was him. Interestingly, after my grandma moved in with my parents, all the strange activities stopped completely. Nothing like that has happened since, but I still think about that night sometimes, the sounds, the music, the feeling in that room, and I can't come up with any explanation that fully makes sense. It's one of those experiences that stays with you, not because you understand it, but because you don't. When I was a kid, my room was right across from the bathroom in our house. I can remember it like it was yesterday, the pale glow of the hallway light, the quiet hum of the house at night. I was probably 6 or 7 years old, lying in bed, half awake, half drifting off into sleep. That's when I saw it. Something peeked out from the bathroom door and waved at me. I remember it vividly. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I screamed, a shrill, terrified sound that echoed through the quiet house. My dad came running, and he looked at the bathroom himself. He checked the whole room, shined a flashlight under the sink, and even peeked into the shower. He assured me that nothing was there, and yet I never took my eyes off the door. I can still picture that moment perfectly, the way it appeared, the motion of its hand, and the darkness behind it. That image has haunted me for more than 20 years. I've had nightmares about it repeatedly, in cycles that flare up for months at a time, no matter where I've lived. I joined the army, moved across the country, chased job opportunities, and changed houses more times than I can count. Yet, sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I still see it. It doesn't matter if it's a new apartment, a rental, or a house I've lived in for years. I occasionally catch a flicker of it, just at the edge of my vision. I can describe it perfectly. It wears a loose white shirt, dark pants, and no shoes. Its body looks almost like a mummy without wrappings. Thin, awkward, unnatural. Its eyes are completely empty, hollow sockets that feel like they're staring right through me. The hair is wild and spiked. There's something between a troll doll and static electricity standing on end. For a visual reference, think of the cover of Iron Maiden's self-titled album, but replace the eyes with empty sockets. That's the creature that has been scaring me since before I even started kindergarten. I have questioned my own mind countless times. Maybe I am exaggerating. Maybe I am imagining things. Maybe it was a bad dream as a child, one that burned itself into my memory and left a permanent scar. But the thing is, I shouldn't be seeing it when I'm fully awake, right? I should be able to dismiss it, rationalize it, and move on. Yet I can't. It appears too vividly, too clearly, for me to fully explain it away. I've tried to find an origin, something to pin it on, a source that could explain it away. I thought back to the shows I watched as a child, trying to trace the image to something I had seen on television. The closest thing I could find was Billy from Hocus Pocus, my favorite Halloween movie. I love that movie, and maybe somewhere in my subconscious, the image got twisted in a bad dream. Maybe a childhood nightmare warped the innocent imagery of a movie into something horrifying. Even so, that explanation doesn't fully sit right with me. Billy doesn't appear in the corner of your eye decades later, after you've seen him hundreds of times and grown up. And yet, I still see it. Sometimes it's a flash as I walk down the hallway. Sometimes it's a subtle shift of shadow out of the corner of my vision. I swear it's there, moving slightly, just on the edge of my perception. I've learned to live with it, in a way. I don't scream anymore, I don't run, but there's an edge of tension, a slight chill when I feel it nearby. My mind races, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps it's fatigue, perhaps my eyes are playing tricks, or perhaps something else is happening that I can't explain. Every time it appears, I pause, holding my breath, staring at nothing directly while feeling like it's watching me from somewhere just beyond my sight. I'm always curious to talk to someone who takes this seriously, someone who won't dismiss it as just a dream or your imagination. Maybe it's paranormal, maybe it's psychological, maybe it's some combination I haven't figured out. I've spent years considering every possibility: sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, trauma-induced visions, or residual fear from childhood. Yet none of those explanations fully account for the clarity, the consistency, or the way it occasionally still appears in my life now. It's a strange, lonely kind of fear. Most people experience nightmares that fade over time, that they can rationalize and leave behind. But this sticks. It follows me through life like a shadow I can never fully escape. The memory of that first wave at me from the bathroom door is so vivid it feels like it happened yesterday. Even after decades, my body reacts in the same way. Heart racing, hairs standing on end, stomach twisting in panic when I catch a glimpse of it again. I can't help but wonder, if it is paranormal, why does it appear to me? Why has it followed me through every move, every job, every house? If it's just in my head, why is it so vivid, so persistent, so real? I've lived with this for so long that it feels almost normal, but deep down, I know it isn't. Normal people don't see things like this. Normal people don't get glimpses of creatures from their worst nightmares in broad daylight, decades after they first saw them. Sometimes I hope it's just my brain misfiring, a quirk of memory and imagination. I tell myself that it's probably harmless, a lingering effect of a bad childhood dream. But the truth is, every time it appears, my rational mind can't completely override the fear. It's like seeing something that exists on the edge of reality, something that doesn't belong in the waking world, but somehow does. And that's why I'm sharing this story. I want to understand it, or at least discuss it with someone who won't dismiss it. Whether it's paranormal, psychological, or a mix of both, it has shaped my life in ways I didn't expect. I've moved so many times, seen so many places, and yet it still appears. It's part of my life, whether I like it or not, a persistent reminder that some fears, some visions, some mysteries are impossible to explain, or perhaps meant to remain unexplained. I had a little sister who was only 2 years old when she passed away. Even now, it still feels strange to say that out loud. She was so young, but at the same time, she didn't feel like a typical 2-year-old. She had cerebral palsy, and physically she struggled, but mentally she was far ahead of where anyone expected her to be. She could speak in full sentences before she even turned 1, and by the time she was 2, you could actually sit down and have a real conversation with her. Not just simple words or repeating things, but actual understanding. She would listen, respond, and even ask questions in a way that didn't match her age at all. It always felt like there was something deeper going on in her mind, like she understood more than she should have. A few months before her last birthday, something started to change. It wasn't anything physical at first. It was the questions she began asking. Out of nowhere, she started asking about death. Not in a random or passing way, but seriously. She would ask things like, what is death and what happens when you die? At first, it didn't fully register how unusual that was. Kids ask weird questions all the time, and I figured maybe she had heard something on TV or picked up a word from somewhere. But she kept asking, not once or twice, but again and again over days and weeks. The frequency of it started to bother me. It didn't feel like curiosity anymore. It felt like something she was trying to understand for a reason. One day, I finally asked her why she kept bringing it up. I remember sitting there not expecting anything unusual, just trying to ease my own curiosity. She looked at me calmly and said, because the old lady in my room tells me I am going to die soon, and I want to know what that is like. I didn't even know how to react in that moment. I just stared at her. My mind went completely blank. It wasn't just what she said, but the way she said it. There was no fear in her voice, no confusion, just a simple, matter-of-fact explanation, like she was telling me something completely normal. At that time, the only people living in the house were my mom, my sister, and me. There were no grandparents living with us, no elderly neighbors coming in and out, no one who matched that description. So hearing that from a 2-year-old hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked her, "What else does this old lady tell you?" She answered, just as calmly as before. She says I am going to die. Oh, but it's okay, because I need to go. You will be okay. That was the moment it really shook me. It wasn't just the idea of an old lady. It was the message. It was too specific, too heavy. And coming from someone so young, it didn't feel like imagination anymore. I didn't know what to do. I could feel myself getting emotional, and I didn't want to scare her or show how much it was affecting me, so I dropped the conversation. I told myself it was just something kids do, that maybe she had a dream or was mixing things together in her head. Later, I told my mom about it, expecting her to brush it off or say I was overthinking. But instead she told me that my sister had said the same things to her. That hit me even harder. It wasn't just a one-time thing or something she randomly said to me. It was consistent. We both tried to explain it away. We told ourselves she was just being a kid, asking strange questions, creating imaginary things. It was easier to believe that than to take it seriously. But I couldn't shake the feeling, so the next time I was alone with her, I decided to ask more. I asked her who this old lady was, what she looked like, when she came, how long she stayed. Her answers were clear and simple. She comes from heaven, she said. She's here to take me there. When I asked what she looked like, she said, like Grandma, but older. I asked when she would come, and she told me after everyone is asleep. I asked how long she stayed, until I fall asleep. There was something about the way she explained it that made it even more unsettling. It wasn't dramatic, or it wasn't imaginative in the way kids usually describe things. It was calm, structured, almost routine. I asked her if the lady had come the night before. She said yes. Then she looked at me and said again, almost like she was trying to comfort me. She said, you will be sad, but not to be. That part stayed with me more than anything else. A 2-year-old trying to reassure me about something like that. I asked her if the lady had said how she was going to die. She said no. I told her, almost without thinking, to ask the lady next time she saw her. I don't even know why I said that. Maybe I was trying to make sense of it. Maybe I was hoping for some kind of clarity. Not long after that, I went back to college. Life continued the way it always did. Classes, assignments, routines. I told myself I would see her again soon, especially with Thanksgiving coming up since her birthday was in November. 2 weeks later, she was gone. She drowned in the bathtub. Even now, writing that feels unreal. It happened so suddenly, so senselessly, that it didn't feel like something that should have been possible. There was no warning in the way we normally understand warnings. No illness that escalated to that point. Just one moment, and then everything changed. After it happened, everything she had said came back all at once. Every conversation, every question, every detail about the old lady. I've spent years thinking about it, trying to understand it, trying to explain it in a way that makes sense. I've never been a religious person. I didn't grow up believing in heaven or anything like that. I've always leaned toward logic, toward things that can be explained. But this is the one thing in my life that I've never been able to fully explain away. At one point, I even looked into the history of the house my mom was living in. I found out that before we moved in, an elderly couple had lived there. The man had passed away years before the woman, and she had continued living there alone until she died. When I read that, I couldn't help but connect it to what my sister had described. I don't know if that means anything. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe my mind is trying to fill in gaps because it needs an answer. What I do know is that a 2-year-old who had no concept of death beyond what we told her spoke about it in a way that still doesn't feel normal. She talked about it calmly, repeatedly, and with details that didn't feel random. There are days when I feel angry about it, or angry that I didn't take it more seriously, that maybe, somehow, something could have been prevented if I had understood what was happening. There are days when I feel nothing but sadness, just the weight of losing someone so young, someone who hadn't even had the chance to live a full life. And then there are moments, quiet ones, where I feel something else. Not exactly peace, but something close to it. The thought that maybe she wasn't afraid, that maybe, whatever she believed or experienced, she felt safe. She would have been 17 next month. Even now, I still don't know what to believe. I don't know if what she saw was real, imagined, or something in between. I don't know if there's a logical explanation that I just haven't found yet. All I know is that it happened, and no matter how much time passes, it's something I've never been able to fully put behind me. She had just moved into that house not long before this happened. It was a big place for just one person, especially in a quiet area like that. The street only had a handful of houses, maybe 5 or 6 in total, and they were spaced far enough apart that you couldn't really see your neighbors unless you went looking for them. On all sides there were woods, not the kind you casually walk through, but the kind that feel thick and deep, like they stretch on forever. During the day, it was peaceful, even beautiful in a way, but at night it felt completely cut off from everything else. It was just her and her 2 cats living there. One night, she was lying in bed, starting to drift off. You know that moment where your thoughts begin to blur and your body feels heavy, like you're just about to fall asleep. That's exactly where she was. The house was completely quiet. No TV, no music, nothing but that still late-night silence. Then she heard it. A soft, slow sound coming from her bedroom door, the doorknob. She said it didn't just rattle or move quickly. It turned slowly, like someone was carefully trying not to make noise. The kind of movement that instantly makes your brain snap awake, even if your body is half asleep. She didn't move at first. She just stared toward the door, trying to figure out if she had imagined it. The handle finished turning, and the door creaked open just a little. Then everything went completely still. No footsteps, no breathing, no sound at all. She said it stayed like that for about 5 seconds, but it felt much longer. The door was slightly open, just enough to see darkness beyond it, and nothing else. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe one of the cats had pushed it. Maybe it wasn't closed all the way. And then, without any warning, the door exploded open. It slammed so hard against the stopper that it echoed through the entire room. She said it sounded like someone had run full speed into it, like they were trying to break it down or force their way inside. The impact was so strong that if the stopper hadn't been there, it probably would have punched a hole straight into the wall. In that instant she felt pure terror, not the kind you get from watching a scary movie or hearing a loud noise. This was deeper, the kind that freezes you completely, where your body won't react, even though your mind is screaming at you to move. She said it felt like all the warmth drained out of her at once, like her blood turned cold. But she didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared at the doorway. After that loud crash, everything went silent again. Completely silent. No footsteps coming toward her. No one standing there. Just the open doorway and darkness beyond it. After a few seconds, she forced herself to move and reached over to turn on her lamp. The soft light filled the room, but the doorway still looked empty. There was nothing there. No shadow, no figure, nothing that could explain what just happened. That's when she grabbed her phone and called her dad. Her voice was shaking as she told him what happened. He didn't hesitate. He came over right away, bringing her brother with him. When they arrived, her dad brought a gun and went through the entire house, checking every room, every closet, every corner. They didn't find anything. No broken locks, no open windows, no signs that anyone had forced their way in. Everything was exactly how it should have been, like nothing had happened at all. That didn't make her feel better. If anything, it made it worse. Eventually, after checking everything multiple times, they told her it was probably nothing. Maybe the door wasn't shut properly. Maybe there was some kind of pressure change in the house. Something explainable, but it didn't feel explainable to her. She tried to sleep, but she said she barely got any rest that night. The next morning, she got up early for work like she always did. It was still dark outside, around 5 a.m., that quiet hour where everything feels a little unreal. She got dressed, grabbed her bag, and headed out the front door. The air outside was cold and still. No wind, no movement, just silence. She started walking down her driveway toward her car, digging through her purse for her keys as she went. She wasn't really paying attention to anything else, just focused on getting out and starting her day. Then she looked up and froze. There was a man standing right in front of her car, not far away, not at the end of the driveway, right there, just a few steps in front of her, like he had been waiting. She said she almost walked straight into him. The shock hit her instantly. She let out a small scream and dropped her purse without even realizing it. Her heart was racing as she tried to process what she was seeing. The man didn't react the way you'd expect. He didn't apologize. He didn't say anything at all. He just looked at her. Not directly, not in a normal way. She described it as a strange or sideways glance, like he was looking at her, but not fully turning his head. It felt off, unnatural, the kind of look that makes you uncomfortable without knowing exactly why. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then he slowly turned and started walking away. He didn't hurry, didn't look back, just shuffled down the driveway, reached the end, and turned toward the main road. Within seconds, he disappeared into the darkness. She stood there for a moment, still trying to catch her breath, then quickly grabbed her things and got into her car. When she drove out of the neighborhood less than half a minute later, he was gone. Completely gone. There was nowhere he could have gone that quickly except into the woods. And that's what bothered her the most, because those woods weren't the kind you just casually walk into, especially in the dark. To this day, she doesn't know what to make of it. Maybe the door and the man weren't connected at all. Maybe it was just a coincidence, two strange events happening back to back. Or maybe someone really had been there that night, and somehow they got inside without leaving a single trace. If you made it all the way to the end of these 15 stories, you've just spent hours walking through other people's worst moments. Now I want to hear from you. Which story is going to follow you into the dark tonight? Comment the number, 1 to 15, and tell me why that one got under your skin. Have you ever experienced something you still can't explain? In your house, on the road, or in a dream that felt too real? Share it in the comments or just answer with a yes or no if you're not ready to talk about it yet. If you watched to the very end, write "still watching in the dark" in your comment so I know you're one of the few who stayed. And before you turn the lights back on, ask yourself, if even one of these stories is real. If this many people are carrying stories like these, how many more are out there, keeping theirs to themselves? Sleep well, if you can.